Tools you will need to complete this job include a socket wrench, a 13/16" spark plug socket, a 16mm socket, and a 10mm socket. Some extensions are helpful in this application. You could also get by just using box wrenches in these socket sizes, except you probably won't have a spark plug wrench in a box wrench. You also will need a 10mm box wrench, open-ended or closed is fine, as well as a 12mm box wrench. Then you will need a 4.5mm hex key, either a screwdriver or a punch, or whatever method you would like to use to determine when the piston is at top dead center. And then, last but not least, a feeler gauge to check the actual clearances. The valves are located on the front of the engine, so the easiest way of accessing it is by removing the front engine cover. So on the front of the engine, the valve cover is this lighter colored metal. It says OHV on it. And there are 4 screws you have to do in order to take it off. And you need a 10mm socket in order to do that. And if you're very careful, you should be able to remove the valve cover without damaging the gasket, and you should be able to reuse it. And that's what it looks like on the inside of the cover. And here's your 2 valves, bottom here and the top there. In order to rotate the engine, so that way we can position the piston at top dead center, we're going to have to remove the spark plug so it's easy to turn. In order to determine top dead center on the compression stroke, which is where you have to measure the clearance between the valves, you're going to need to take a 16mm socket and put it on the drive pulley on the crankshaft below the motor. And then to figure out when you're hitting the compression stroke, you can take your finger and put it over the spark plug hole and move through the motions until you feel pressure against your finger. And then you know you're on the compression stroke. And I can hear it leaking out around my finger. And when the pressure relieves, you know you just passed the compression stroke. Then you can take your punch in and put it in the hole. And with your punch in the hole, you can measure to see when the piston's at top dead center. So if you take your 16mm socket and put that on the drive pulley on the bottom of the crankshaft, and you move it back and forth, you can see that the punch is going in, so that means the piston is going down. So I'm going to back it up some. I'm just going to keep working it back and forth until I get it right where I want it. Alright, so that's about top dead center right there. You want it to where this rod or whatever you put in there is sticking out the most on the compression stroke, and you find the compression stroke by putting your finger over the hole. To check the clearance, you will need your feeler gauge now, and I have the 0.006 inch and 0.15 millimeter feeler gauge here, and then you want to see how easily this goes in here, and it feels a little bit loose. You want it to go in, but not too easily. This one feels like it's going in too easy. I could probably do a bigger one. Let's just see about how far off we really are. And 0.008 is pretty tight on this bottom one. And here on this top one, I'm able to fit 0.012, which is twice as much. The bottom one I'm not able to. I have too much clearance, so I need to adjust these. Put the 6mm back in there. Put my Allen key here. Break it loose. And then we're going to screw in. And you screw in until you make contact. So now I've made contact, and put this guy back in there. Just screw in until you feel contact made, and then you're going to use your, let's see if I can set this here. Use your 12mm box wrench to tighten up the lock nut, and keep your Allen key in there to hold the adjustment screw in place. so it doesn't turn. Alright, and then check to see that you have the right amount of clearance. Try the 0.007, and that feels pretty tight going in there. So we know that we are at 0.006. Now we have to do it to the other one. And one final check. Start with 7 thousandths, doesn't want to go, doesn't want to go, and then we'll check 6 just to make sure nothing went crazy the other way. Alright, 6 fits, 6 fits. The last thing we have to do here now is just put our valve cover back on. And first I'm going to take a nice paper towel here, just use this one that's been absorbing the little bit of oil that's sitting in here. And you don't have to drain the oil to do this. I didn't. I'm just going to clean up the surfaces here while I have this cover off. Several auto mechanics will recommend that when an engine has a relatively large number of hours on it, that it's time to, instead of just adjusting these things, replace a few things. And some of the recommendations that I've heard is to replace these rocker arms, to replace the push rod, and all this hardware like the lock nut, the adjustment screw. All those things, they're relatively inexpensive, and there's wear on these, I can tell. I mean, there's movement. So replacing those really probably wouldn't be a bad idea instead of just making adjustments. And replacing them does not appear that it would be very difficult either. Now that I've snugged up these bolts for the valve cover, you just want to make them tight enough so they don't leak oil. If you see oil leaking out, maybe you need to tighten them a little bit more, but they really don't take a whole lot. So just like on a wheel, you're going to want to do it in sort of like a torque pattern. Because it's only 4 bolts, you're just going to want to basically do an X. So I'm just going to do top left, bottom right, bottom left, and then top right. Once the valve cover's back on, then you just need to put your spark plug back in and put your cover back on your mower. And this is how you check and adjust the valve clearances on your John Deere 325 lawnmower.